Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, a photographer based in Northern California in the United States of America. And today we're going to be talking about the Nikon Z 70 to 180 f2.8 optic. This little guy right here. And I got this recently and I'm actually kind of in love with this lens. I've been using it for a lot of different stuff, from marathons to portrait shoots to events. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of that today, give you some examples, and share with you my unbiased, unsolicited opinion about why this is a pretty sweet lens in the Nikon Z lineup. So let's get into it. So I'm a nature and wildlife photographer. That's at least how I kind of brand myself. And for most of that work, I'm using a wildlife lens. Now, I've been using primarily this guy right here, which is the Nikon 400mm f4.5 lens. It is an optic that fits into the Nikon lineup really nicely and their amazing telephoto range, but it's also something that brought me back to Nikon from Canon. It's a lens that exists really in no other brand lineup on mirrorless mount. You do have the Canon EF 400mm f4 DO lens, which is an awesome lens. It costs like twice as much as this guy, and it's not as light. This is only 3 pounds, so it's actually under 3 pounds. Anyway, so I use this primarily with a 1.4x teleconverter, though I have started to think about the 600 PF, but that's for a later conversation. So I use the 400 focal length. I also use, where's my guy here, the 24 to 120. Now this lens is the kit lens that comes with the Z8, and it is a really good lens. I love this guy, and it was amazing on the F mount, and it is great on the Z mount. But I use this for primarily landscape photography. It's like the perfect lens for landscape in my opinion. And I use it for some macro work because it has like a close to 1.4x, 1.38 I think x magnification factor. So I've used this for ladybug photography and videography and some of the work that I've done around nature in the Bay Area. But there's this range obviously that's in between these props here, these two lenses, right? There's that 120 to 400mm range. And I'll say this, I'm not the kind of person that wants to fill my focal length range. Now, why did I get this when I just talked about not really needing to fill that gap and not feeling an obligation to do it? Well, the reason why is because I started getting into more portrait and sports photography. And I found that that kit, that 24 to 120 f4 and the 400 f4.5, it wasn't hitting either of those genres of photography. And I needed something that would sort of fit in between those two, maybe give me a little more versatility on the landscape side, but would really primarily be a sports photography and portrait lens. And that's kind of how I got to this guy. Now I looked at the 70-200. This is not a comparison video, but that lens, it does just a little comparison. It weighs twice as much almost. It's 3 pounds versus 1.75. And it definitely costs twice as much. It's $2,500 versus $1,250 for this lens. So I wasn't really compelled to buy a 70-200 just to fill that gap with sports photography and portrait photography. I also didn't want to lug around a 3-pound lens, to be quite honest with you. And so I started looking outside of the box and I found this lens. Okay, so I saw 70 to 180 f2.8 and I thought, that's kind of like second tier. It's not as good quality. It's more like a plastic lens. It doesn't have VR. It's going to be a crappy lens and it's cheaper. So like, you don't get your cake and eat it too, or whatever the saying is. But I bought it because I wanted to see how it performed. And let me just tell you, off the bat or 5 minutes into this video, it performs really well. I mean, particularly at the long end, at the 180 f2.8, like wide open, it's sharpest there. And that is really great because I'm not buying this lens to shoot 70-2.8. I'm really buying it to shoot that kind of like 135 to 180 range wide open. So the fact that it sharpens up maximum sharpness at that level is really great. The other things I love about it is it's so easy to hand hold. I mean, it's small. It reminds me of like the 70 to 300s of the F mount age. And it's lightweight. It's very easy to fit in your pack. I mean, it fits vertically, in my Shimoda pack, which has 6-inch depth. It stabilizes fine. This is the other thing that's kind of nice about it. When you throw it on a body like this, the Z8, it balances really well. So that's one thing. It's very easy to hold. But also the IBIS in the Z8, because it balances well and because this lens is really light, it's able to overcome what normally would be a bit of a fatal flaw in terms of stabilizing longer lenses with IBIS. So when you get out to like 150 to 200 millimeters and beyond, it can actually be pretty challenging to stabilize a lens just with IBIS, because when you're out at like those longer focal lengths, tiny little movements on the camera side, right? Like little movements have a larger effect on your image because your field of view is so much smaller. So it's more prone to vibrations and movement messing up your image. And, because it's lighter, I think, and maybe a little bit shorter at 180, this lens actually can be stabilized pretty well handheld. And when you put it, with IBIS, the IBIS is able to give it that extra oomph that I found that like this lens, the 24 to 120, is also not VR. There's no VR. It's not lens stabilized. I felt like these two lenses stabilized basically equally well on the Z8, and that's saying something. So, it wasn't a big issue. So scratch the VR thing off the list for me. Scratch the sharpness issue off the list. I mean, this lens was plenty sharp to resolve the 45 megapixel sensor, and the images I've been getting out of it have been great. And so, as I kind of like picked away at the negatives, at the cons, I started to realize this lens was like pretty darn good. So anyway, I've shot a couple events with it. I want to give you some samples and some examples before this video takes too long. I'm trying to keep these 10 minutes or less. We're at 7 minutes and 49 seconds. So I shot a couple events with this. So I shot the Oakland Marathon as a course photographer. That's a test for a lens like this, okay? Because I'm shooting fast, relatively fast moving subjects. It's a uncompromising environment. The way you shoot professional events like that, just so you know, is they hand you a compact flash card or SD card or a collection of them. You put them in your camera, you shoot small JPEG, and you hand them the card at the end of the day, and you're done. That's typically how it's been. So you're not editing your photos. You're not cropping your photos. You need sharp, straight out of camera, beautiful images that fill the frame. And you need all of that handled, and you need it just done in camera during the event, and you hand the card over. So this lens, to perform in that environment, to get these sharp images that you're seeing right now, of runners, of athletes in the moment, of those seconds with family and with kids that you can only capture with one shot. The fact that it performed in that environment, I think says a lot. I would have blurred out the background more. I would have shot at f2.8, but the organizers and the way these organizations work, they tell you to shoot at a more narrow depth of field. Or a wider depth of field, I'm sorry. So I shoot at like f7, f8. So they're not gonna have the creamy bokeh that you want. But I've also shot this lens in more portrait situations. So I took this out at a sunset, kind of like photo shoot with my family as we went out and just had pizza at the park because the weather here has been incredible. And I took some photos of my son. And the images are just gorgeous out of this camera. I'm out of this lens rather. I'm so happy with the sharpness, with the bokeh, with the ability to lock eye autofocus. It performs super well. So finally, I took the lens out and I shot an event indoors. So I went to my sister's PhD defense. She's defending and becoming a doctor and getting her PhD. And so this was an indoor environment lit entirely by lighting from the outside and through a window. And it was just like excellent. The lens wide open, f2.8, 180, kind of at that longer telephoto length, very sharp images, really nice bokeh, even though, in this case, like my sister's really close to her computer. She's close to the cups and the other kind of like papers that are around her. You still get a really nice, beautiful, sharp image. So, and that nice bokeh blur. So I was like super happy with the way the lens performed in a sports event, in an outdoor portrait shoot, and in an indoor event photography situation. And man, it's a good bargain. Like at half the price of the 7200 with very excellent performance. I find no faults in the way this performed. It tracks, the focus was good. I'm sure it could be faster. I mean, it can always be faster, but it performed well enough to shoot professional events. So, there's not much more you can ask from a lens like this. It's a Tamron lens. I don't think it's any surprise there. It's no coincidence the kind of odd focal length of that 70 to 180 is the Tamron 70 to 180. It's the G1 version, the Generation 1 version of that lens, which has been available on Sony mount for a while. They've rebadged it Nikon. They apparently have coated it with some new coatings that allow it to be a little bit more flare resistant. And I certainly didn't see any issues with flaring or weird kind of like effects or anything like that. So whatever coatings are on the lens are doing a pretty good job. Whether they're original Tamron ones or Nikon ones, I don't really know. There is a G2 version of this lens, which is available on Sony mount, that does have image stabilization. So yeah, it'd be nice to have image stabilization on this lens. On the other hand, it would probably weigh a little bit more if it did. And like I said, I think the IBIS kind of overcomes that. So I recommend this lens. I mean, I don't really have any issues with it. The one frustration I had with this lens has to do with its design, and that's that I wanted to put a tripod collar on this lens. When shooting events like the marathon, you're shooting like 6 to 8 hours. It's tiring. I don't have an L grip and I don't have the grip on my D850. Why do I keep doing that on my Z8? So I was shooting like this. I was shooting, with my wrist. You see that? Just bad form, hurts your neck. It bothers you after shooting for that long on a monopod. And so what I wanted to do was mount a tripod collar to this and rotate the tripod collar so that it was a vertical alignment for the camera. So at least I could just leave the camera kind of where it was. I wasn't able to do that. I did find, I don't know if I have it here, I think I already returned it, a tripod collar. It was put out by a company that said it would fit for this. I'll put the name on the screen. It did fit for the 70 to 180 as well as the 24 to 200, I think, but it didn't rotate. So because of the design, you couldn't rotate the lens to do vertical. So it was basically, the camera, you couldn't rotate the camera to shoot vertical. It would only work kind of horizontally. So it wasn't really of any value to me. So one frustration is you can't put a mount on this so that you can put a tripod collar on. I would not shoot this with a tripod collar in most situations. It was just in that situation where you want to attach a monopod to it. I would have liked to have that capability. So what I ended up doing was mounting a Arcus compatible mount on the end, and I don't know if I don't really have it here, but I basically used a ball head, locked the ball head, in a kind of vertical alignment and just shot that way. It worked, but it was honestly more fun to hold handheld than using the monopod. So anyway, that's my review. That's my like overview and review of this little lens. I don't think if I had the money, I don't think I'd get the 7200. I think I'd go with this lens because I prefer the smaller form factor and I much prefer the weight of this lens. It's a much more fun lens to use when doing any sort of event or portrait photography because it's so much easier to handhold. Let me know if this is helpful for you. Like the video if you feel so inclined. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more feedback and more inputs from me on Nikon equipment and wildlife photography and other things too. And I will, hey guys. So there you have it. That's my little review of this lens and I hope it's helpful for you. Family just got back. That means we're done. So yeah, like the video if it was helpful. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this content. And yeah, don't forget to get outside and enjoy the natural world and get out there. So see you next time. Take care.